In Architects of the West Kingdom, you're taking on the role of a medieval French architect, and you're going to be deploying 20 workers across different worker placement spots on the board to gather resources, hire apprentices, construct buildings, and do some kind of shady stuff like go to the black market and even round up some of your opponent's workers to sell them off for a ransom to the local keep. And I think the great thing about this game is that there's a really interesting push-pull mechanism at the core of it. On the one hand, the more workers you deploy to a certain location, the more powerful actions you'll be able to take. So if, for example, I put one worker in the mines, I can get 2 brick. But if I put 2 workers in the mines, I can get a gold, and so on and so forth. And as I add more workers to a location, typically I can take more and more powerful actions. Now, the flip side to that, and again, the element that makes this quite an interesting mechanism, is that the more you gather your workers up in a specific location, the higher the probability will be that you will be targeted by your opponent players. If you look here at the forest in the middle of the board, there's 4 green players there, 4 green workers there. And so that player's taking some really powerful actions at the forest, but he's also making himself a massive target for other players to go to the town center and round up his workers, then sell them to the keep. So this kind of push-pull at the center of the game is really the gaming spinal cord or foundational structure of the game, and it is a lot of fun. The other thing that makes this game really interesting is the virtue track, which you can see on the side here. And this isn't a victory track per se, but what it does is it tracks your virtue in the game, and the less virtuous you are, the more you'll be able to save on taking certain actions because you don't pay tax. As a shady character, you're very good at tax avoidance, so where you need to pay tax at various locations to take them, you'll pay increasingly lower amounts of tax. You will also, on the flip side, be losing potentially victory points at the end of the game. So there's a pro and a con to a pro and a con to being low on the virtue track. The other aspect of it is that you won't necessarily be able to do certain actions like participate in constructing the cathedral, which is a nice end of game scoring opportunity. On the other hand, if you go higher up on the virtue track, you get end game points, end game victory points. But you are also prevented from using the black market. So there are pros and cons to being both high and low on the on the virtue track. And I, for one, have not seen anybody win this game without being higher up on the virtue track towards the end of the game. But there are certain ways you can climb up the virtue track pretty quickly. So it tends to be, at least in the 5 or 6 games that I've played, that people will hover around the lower level of the virtue track, save some money on taking various actions, and then towards the end of the game, or sort of second half of the game, try to climb up the virtue track. And I think when you take that virtue track and this interesting mechanism of being able to get more powerful actions by placing more workers, but also being able to round other people's workers up, you have a really nice additional level of flavor to this worker placement game as compared to a lot of the other worker placement games that we see out on the market. And the other thing that I really enjoy about this game is the artwork. It looks really beautiful, really vivid, characterful artwork. It's the same artists that the publishers used for other games like Raiders of the North Sea, and it just looks amazing. And beyond the artwork, the other thing that's really interesting is the speed of this game. It's a very, very fast game to play because there's no rounds. You're literally just moving in a continuous flow. Every player is taking a turn to place just one worker down at a time. So the game can move really, really fast. I think we played a 4-player game this last week at just probably an hour and 10 minutes. So it was very, very quick, and that's quite different from a lot of other Euro games or worker placement games where you've got turns in between that have a different cycle, and you've got to do cleanup or setup for the next turn. You've got multiple actions that you need to take. So I think that's really a great pro of this game. The one thing to be aware of is that there's kind of a focus for how you're going to be scoring points in this game, and that's going to be around constructing buildings, which are in this green deck of cards, and each of those buildings gives you VP, victory points at the end of the game. And to construct those buildings, you'll need both resources but also apprentices, these kind of specialized workers, and each of them has this kind of different icon on their cards, hammers, axes, other types of equipment that they feature. And what will happen is that you'll look at a building card and it'll say, you know, you need these many resources, but also you have to have an axe or a hammer worker in your tableau of apprentices to be able to construct it. And the apprentices are good because you can kind of see here from this iconography that there's a lot of other bonuses you get. Some of them improve your virtue, like this guy. Some of them will ensure that you get additional bonus resources when taking various actions. So these add a lot of flavor and variety to the game, and depending on your starting player, can really support your strategy. And it's worth noting that each of the players can play the game in a sort of non-asymmetric fashion, where you'll all have different looking player boards with different characters on, but the starting point will be the same. Or if you flip those character cards over, you will get different abilities and different starting points. So for example, this character here starts with 4 of their workers in the prison, in the keep, 5 silver, 5 virtue, and an additional building card. As well as that, they have this ability throughout the game to convert or to use gold and marble interchangeably. And there's other characters that have similarly interesting asymmetric abilities. So I think that, combined with the different types of apprentices here, does give you a direction that you can move through in the game, as well as obviously the buildings that you might be picking. So there is a kind of direction you can go from, especially when you play the asymmetric version of the game. There is a kind of strategy that you can employ. That being said, as I said, the building cards are the main way you're going to be scoring points. I find it very hard to imagine that people are going to win without building a few buildings. It's not something that I've experienced in my place. You do get points at the end of the game for building the cathedral, as well as for various resources, but I think really typically you're going to have to be building out those buildings. And that perhaps leads me to make a particular clarification about this game, that it is more tactical than strategic. Although you can move towards a certain direction and, you know, be guided by the starting player card that you have and perhaps some of the initial buildings you have towards a particular type of strategy, because the game is moving so fast and your workers could be rounded up at any moment from any spot on the board, a spanner can very easily be thrown into the works for you. And so you'll have to consider making adjustments and strategy changes mid-game. So the game ends up being a little bit more tactical than strategic. And I think, you know, after playing it, as I said, 5 or 6 times now myself, the only thing that I guess slightly bugs me, it's not like a major issue, but it's just that it feels a little bit shallow on that kind of victory point scoring aspect. But at the same time, I think that's to be expected, because this is not a super heavy game. This is a light to medium game, I would say. Definitely, you know, on the lighter side of medium, because it is quite easy to set up, it's easy to teach, it's easy to learn, and it's very quick and smooth moving. And really the 2 key variables in the game are going to be the apprentices and the buildings that you get. Those are going to add the variety, as well as the starting player abilities that you get. But besides that, it's pretty standard gathering resources, converting them into other victory points through building buildings. And I think really that's the genius of this game, that it's managed to give you that feel of perhaps a more standard Euro worker placement game, perhaps a slightly deeper worker placement game, in a more light and accessible and quick moving package. So overall, you know, I think this is a really fun game, and there's no surprise that literally everybody's heaped praise on this game. It has a really excellent solo mode, or AI player that you could include in a 2-player game as well to upgrade it to a 3-player game. And I've played pretty much all of my 2-player games with this AI thrown in. It's very easy to work. You just literally go through a deck of cards and, you know, take the appropriate actions that are listed on the card for the AI player. There's 2 different levels of difficulty that you can employ for the AI. which is fantastic. Really, really upgrades the scalability of the game, and also means that you can play solo if you want to. So I think overall this is a really fun game. I think just be aware that over the longer term this might start to wear a little thinner, because I don't think it has the depth of strategy there that other games do have, and there is a little bit of luck of the turn, so to speak. It's not luck in the sort of dice throwing sense, but you might just be unlucky that somebody's picked you to grab your workers up from a spot before picking somebody else, because there will be those decisions. You've got 3 workers somewhere, somebody else has got 3 workers somewhere, and they just happen to pick you for a particular reason. But it would be false to say that this game is super luck dependent, because it's not at all. But you are vulnerable in your strategy to having your plans messed with, just because of that interactive aspect of people grabbing your workers and selling them off to the keep. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But otherwise, I think it's a great game. Again, easy to teach, easy to get to the table, beautiful looking. And the last thing I'll say is that the box for this game is super compact, super well proportioned. Fantastic job from the publishers and the designers from getting that box together in such a well packaged way, especially for people like myself who have very limited shelf space and are looking for the board game boxes that I have to pack as much board game into them as possible. So Architects of the West Kingdom, fantastic game. Definitely recommend you check it out. And that's it. Thanks very much.